Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I've got quite a lot to say, so I'm hoping it's gonna fit into half an hour. But they're very important things that I have to say. And as many of you know, I'm a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion in the UK. And the first thing I want to say is the founders that set up Extinction Rebellion were intending to set up a rebellion against extinction. It was not a brand. It was not like just two arbitrary words. It was a rebellion. And maybe if you don't understand what a rebellion is, you should look it up on Wikipedia. A rebellion is to go into confrontation with the state to the extent that you are arrested and imprisoned. An extinction means there's no more life left. The human race does not exist anymore. It was a rebellion against the state to prevent the extinction of the human race. That's what Extinction Rebellion was set up to do. So please do not be distracted by those who joined the movement afterwards and turned it into an NGO. That's not what it was about. So I just want to start with that sort of, anchoring proposition to you all. Just in terms of what I'm going to say and who I am. I always say this and I want to say it again, which is I am only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion or any organization. I only speak for myself. I've only ever spoken for myself, and you can take it or leave it. Secondly, it has been mentioned that it's an honor to have me. That's a nonsense. I am here to be in service to you, right? It's a total honor for me to be here talking to you, right? Don't worry about me. I'm just a Welsh farmer. You're the heroes, and I'm here to say how utterly fantastic it is what you've been engaging in. I'm going to talk about things which are extremely obvious morally and strategically. The difficulty is actually taking on the implications of those simple truths. There's nothing complicated here. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. The other thing I want to say is I'm here to tell the truth as I see it. Extinction Rebellion was set up to tell the truth and to act as if it is real. Telling the truth is an act of virtue. It's not an act of expediency. I'm not going to tell you the truth in order to try to convince you or because I've got some tactical maneuver. I'm telling you the truth because it's the truth, because the truth in itself is a virtue. This is another essential transgression that Extinction Rebellion was trying to make when it was founded. That we are here not to win, we are here to tell the truth and to act as if that truth is real. And there is a good possibility we will win. But as soon as you start focusing on winning, you go down the rabbit hole of expediency, compromise, and reformism. That's not where we're at in 2022. So I'm not actually enormously interested in persuading you. I'm here to tell you my truth, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to take it on. So, just to reiterate, I think what has happened in Sweden is, without beating around the bush, absolutely fantastic, unambiguously brilliant. Well done. There's no caveats on that one. Okay. Why is that? Because you took proportionate action. You took action which was called for by the severity, the objective severity, the objective immorality, the catastrophic evil of what is happening. Secondly, you spoke the truth. You said clearly that this was justified. You did not apologize for what you did. It was the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. And that is at the heart of this movement, which came out of Extinction Rebellion, to tell the truth and to act as if that truth is real. It's also interesting to note that the biggest climate campaigns in the world at the present time are all based upon telling the truth and acting as if it's real. In other words, that old wisdom that to tell the truth and to act as if it's real is actually the most strategically clever thing to do. There is not a contradiction between morality and strategy when you're dealing with evil. In other words, the Italians, as you may know, went and blockaded Rome using a similar methodologies to you, and it was the biggest campaign for decades in Italy. The French went and blockaded motorways, stopped tennis matches, hundreds and thousands of people contacted them, millions of people know what's going on. In Canada, they blockaded motorways, and they got into negotiations with the government. So the biggest campaigns happening in the Western world are all using the methodologies that have come out of Extinction Rebellion are being used in the A22 network. But that's not why we're doing it. We're not doing it because it works. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And because it's the right thing to do, it happens to work. That's the way round you need to think about it. Okay, so I think it's worth being clear about what we are clear about and to communicate this to the Swedish public with absolute clarity and confidence. And the situation can be summed up in about the next 5 minutes. There's different ways of doing this, as you all know, and many of you, not all of you, are aware of the absolute severity and catastrophic nature of what is happening. But let's just remind ourselves, first of all, it is absolutely clear now that the world is going to go over 1.5 degrees of warming. That is absolutely clear. James Hansen in the US last November said, the idea that we can stay under 1.5 degrees is, quote, unadulterated bullshit. It's gone. And any NGOs and any reformists that continue to spread the lie that we're going to stay under 1.5 are engaging in a malicious lie. It's gone. The second thing we need to be absolutely clear on is at the present moment, the world is speeding up and over 2 degrees. 2 degrees centigrade, according to peer-reviewed papers, is 1,000 million people on the move, 1,000 million refugees within the next 20 years. It's a crude comparison, but it's something like 200 Ukraines. 200 Ukraines. That is an act of unambiguous, catastrophic evil to engage in activities that will remove 1 in 6 people in this planet, 1 in 7 people in this planet from where they've lived for hundreds and thousands of years. The other thing that needs to be communicated to those rather selfish Swedish people that you know is this will lead to the collapse of the global trading system. You cannot maintain a world trading system, a world economy, when 1 in 7 people are on the move. That's a no-brainer. In other words, the Swedish population, although not directly impacted, will be massively impacted by the collapse of the economy. And every economy will go into drastic and permanent depression. And that's just the beginning, as we know. Because as Johan Rostrom said, the director of the Potsdam Institute, Europe's most respected climate research institute, if we go over 2 degrees, we're almost certainly heading over 3 because we've passed the tipping points. 3 degrees is 2 million people, 2 billion people on the move, 200,000 people. So the fundamental point here that needs to be communicated is not just that we're engaging in the biggest act of injustice imposed by one population upon another population. It's that we actually lose the whole planet. We lose the whole of the earth because we head into a hothouse situation. The last thing to say is our most prestigious scientist in the UK, arguably our top scientist, Sir David King, has said, we only have 3 years. We only have 3 years to reverse this slide into tipping points and into a tragedy and an injustice which is beyond description. So what I've outlined here, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the most horrendous situation imaginable. The most terrible thing is about to happen. It's about to happen across the whole world, and it's going to go on forever. I challenge anyone on this call to think of a worse prospect. That's what we face. And it's really, really important that we understand that when we start to think about our moral and political obligations. We cannot separate the actuality of the harm being created from our own responsibilities to act, and the responsibilities of other Europeans, other people in the Western world, other people in Sweden. The two things are completely linked. What we have to understand and what we have to make absolutely clear is that this is an act of murder by one part of the world against another part of the world. Because this death is a product of the actions of putting carbon into the atmosphere. There is a direct causal link between the lifestyles and economies of the Western world and the mass death in the global South. Secondly, it is entirely known, it is completely known that the actions of the Western world over the last 30 years have created this mass death. Knowingly and willingly, our governments have allowed this to happen. This is crucial. This is what makes it mass murder. It's not killing inadvertently, it's killing with an objective, which is to maintain one's economic and political and cultural power. In other words, I would suggest to you that you stop talking about climate change, a technocratic word that was designed by the corporate class in America to divert responsibility to where it was. What we should talk about is a death project by the elites against other populations. And death projects, we have to be clear, have been entertained and enacted over and over again in human history. I'd like to remind you that in the early 1940s, when Hitler had a plan to invade the Soviet Union, according to key historians on this, Tim Schneider and others, the documentation was clear. The aim was to go into the Ukraine and starve and slaughter 30 million Slavs, to depopulate the Ukraine and fill it with Germans. And that was a direct response to the colonial genocides of the colonializing powers. Belgium went into the Congo and facilitated the murder of 11 million Africans in the late 19th century. The colonial powers went into the Americas and facilitated the death of 50 million indigenous peoples. The manifest destiny doctrine of the USA was to eliminate and kill the indigenous peoples. This is a long, long tradition where one population decides another population is disposable in order to maintain and further its economic and political power. That's what's going on here. It's not an unfortunate consequence, right? It's a known policy of genocide. That's what's happening in Pakistan. That's why they're asking for reparations, because they know that the indifference of populations and governments in the West has created the disasters that have been locked in South Asia. A third of that country is underwater as a direct consequence of the policies of our governments. And we as citizens, as democratic citizens, are complicit in that mass murder project. This is the paradigm shift on which we will win the argument, right? This is a completely different proposition. This is not environmentalism. This is not some poor issue about polar bears and dolphins, important as they are. It's a centuries-long act of plunder and dominance. Except, right? This is the critical issue. Except that this time round, the project is entirely nihilistic. Because in past examples, the proposition of murder and plunder had an economic rationality to it. It was a brutal rationality. It is like, we want what you've got and we will kill you to get what you have got. The proposition now is we will kill and slaughter hundreds of millions of people and thereby destroy the climate system and thereby destroy ourselves as well. There is no economic rationality to this final death project. And that has to be communicated, that this is an act of pure nihilism. In other words, there's no value to it other than propagating death. And that's why we will win, by the way. Right? That's why we're going to win. Because it's totally fucking stupid. It's as clear as that, right? This is total fucking madness, isn't it? Right? Only a fucking psychopath would dream up doing this to the earth. And that's what they are. Maybe some of you haven't met top politicians, by the way. I've met plenty of top politicians and plenty of the people who run this society as co-founder of XR. And I can tell you without a shadow of doubt, you are dealing with psychopaths. You are dealing with people that have zero empathy for moral responsibility. Otherwise, they would have done something by now. They've done nothing. It's absolutely outrageous. So we need to be clear about our own values. You know, one of the great things about Sweden that has inspired people all around the world is your 100-year-long tradition of social democracy. We have a similar tradition in the UK. And it's rooted in those values that we have to understand the necessity to act. We are not acting as individuals. We are acting as people embedded in an ethical and moral tradition. We're an outcome of that tradition, and we find strength in being in that tradition. We're not isolated individuals here, right? We are part of a tradition that goes back generation after generation, where people have struggled and died for the values we believe in, and now we are going to struggle and possibly die for the values that they believed in and we believe in. That's the situation. We need to be absolutely clear. What is going on here is an act of war. An act of war against the small island states that are now going to disappear, against sovereign states, an act of war against whole populations, an act of war against the very state itself, an act of war against Swedish society and the Swedish state. This is serious, right? I've talked to ex-judges and top lawyers in the UK who have produced a letter this week saying that if we go over 1.5 degrees, then we undermine the rule of law. If you undermine the rule of law in a Western democracy, that is an act of treason against a democratic state. That's how serious this is. And they are very serious people. They are the guardians of the British Constitution. And what they are saying is if we go over 1.5, if the British government engages in policies that take us over 1.5, they are treasonous because they risk and propagate the possibility and arguably the inevitability of the collapse of British society. That's how serious it is. That's what you need to say in the studios to the Swedish people, right? It's as serious as that. Don't get distracted by half apologies and reformist language and NGO language, right? We have a little bit of a problem. We don't have a little bit of a problem, right? We have a death project, and it requires a proportionate response. The proportionate response is resistance. Resistance is not a slogan. Resistance means engaging in the disruption of the economy and the organization of a society that is engaged in unacceptable immorality. That's what resistance is. Let's be very clear about its definition. It's not something to stick on your bloody wall, right? It is a decision that you have no choice as a Democrat, right? As part of that 200-year tradition, other than to go into resistance. And I'm being clear with you, you have no choice, right? We should not fetishize choice. Choice is not an absolute value. Choice is an extremely important value, but it's not an absolute. You know, you can go to the supermarket and have a choice between oranges and apples, but you don't get a choice to not act against a genocidal regime. Does everyone understand that? This is very important. That doesn't mean everybody on this call has to go to prison. Some people have extreme responsibilities to young people or to old people. Some people need to do the media. Some people need to do the support. But 80% of the people on this call can and should engage in civil resistance to the point of being incarcerated in order to enact effective resistance. Because of the absolute extremity of the immorality we face. The other thing to make clear here is societies are not absolutely good. a society can and does and often have completely lost their morality, right? The German population that voted for the Nazis in 1933 was catastrophically immoral. And as Hannah Arendt said, Hannah Arendt, the Jewish philosopher who fled to France in 1934, she said, you have to be in resistance against the Nazi regime in 1934, despite it being elected democratically, right? When the Nazis took over France in 1940, the Vichy regime did not want to protect the collecting up and deportation of Jews. The French population stood by. They were wrong. When the resistance started in France, it was unpopular, but it was the right thing to do. Right? In my own country, in the 18th century, the mass of English people supported slavery. They were wrong. They were wrong. Because when those ships left Africa, a third of those black people died on the route to the Caribbean. Another third died in the first year. It was a genocidal project. The British population was wrong, and the people who stood up said so, right? Sometimes people are wrong. And you have to have the courage to say that, right? This is why I'm engaging in this call with you, right? Is to encourage you to have the confidence of the absolute rightness of what you're doing. And I'm saying this as a liberal, okay? There are many, many subjects that are proportionate and confusing. This is not one of those subjects. This is absolutely clear. It could not be more clear. It's a project to kill hundreds of millions of people, destroy the whole of human civilization, and to do it for the next 100,000 years. That's clear, right? There's no dispute on that one. You see what I'm saying? We're not talking about a polluted river in Copenhagen or, you understand what I'm saying here. This is not environmentalism. This is a death project. That's how you're going to win, by the way, by making this absolutely clear, because you're right and people deep down know you're right. Okay? That's why they're going to hate you, by the way. Every moral battle in history starts out with people being hated and beaten up and killed. And then you win. There's no easy method here, right? The process of being hated is the process of redemption through which a society comes to its senses and realizes its immorality. There's no shortcut. I wish there was. I sincerely wish there was, because the last thing I want to do is to do this work. I'm sure many of you don't want to do this work, right? I was 20 years a farmer. I love farming, but I'm not doing it anymore because there's something more important. Yeah? Something so much more important. So I want to say something else. Sorry, Helen, I've got about another 4 or 5 minutes, but you did ask me to talk about this. So I want to say something really clear to you. And maybe this will be a bit shocking, but I'm not going to mince my words because that's not my style. Okay? So this is what I've got to say to you. Civil resistance is not passivity. Okay? Civil resistance is not pacifism. If you want to define pacifism as not engaging in any action that is going to result in harm to others, the definition of civil resistance is, and listen to this carefully, the definition of civil resistance is the refusal to engage in violence as a mechanism of change, but to engage in disruption. It's not the refusal to engage in disruption that has zero risk of harm coming to others. There's a big difference. I refuse to engage in violence, but if harm results, right, in a secondary sense to my actions, then that is justified. That is justified by the moral objectives of my project, right? In European civilization for the last 1,000 years, there has been the just war theory, right? It is justified to cause harm in order to stop greater harm, right? In English common law, you can cause disruption. You can cause like activities that produce harm in order to prevent greater harm. It's a fundamental aspect of European law. In other words, if you go out non-violently, right, and block a motorway, and people come to harm through a secondary effect of that, that is justified. That is justified. Let me give you two examples. When the Freedom Riders, right? Everyone knows about the Freedom Riders. Fantastic guys, right? Are you sure? Are you really sure they were fantastic guys? They went down in a bus, right, to Alabama. What about the other people in the bus? They were clear. They were going out down in the bus, black and white people sharing their seats. When they got to Alabama, the fascists, the racists, set fire to the bus. Has anyone thought what the other people on the bus thought? They were innocent, but harm came to them as a result of standing up for justice. When a week later, people from Atlanta went to Alabama, they were sitting in the bus station. The racist mob came in and beat them up. There was a black guy who came out of the toilets, dare I say it, it's slightly comical, and they beat him up. The black guy had never had anything to do with the Freedom Riders. You understand what I'm saying, right? This is not for the faint-hearted. This is not for idealists, right? It's not for absolute moralists. This is about civil resistance, okay? And do not think for a minute that they did not realize this beforehand, okay? Why do you think Martin Luther King went to Selma? Because violence would happen, okay? It's a brutal, it's a realist philosophy of action. And it's a necessary philosophy of action in order to achieve justice, okay? It's a middle way. It's not passivity, it's not terrorism, it's civil resistance. And you have to be honest and clear to people on the media and say it is justified to sit on a motorway and have a small possibility that someone in an ambulance will suffer because we're justified because of the extremity of the injustice we're stopping. That's a hard thing to do. But until you do it, you're not being honest with the Swedish people and you're not being honest to yourselves. And that's how you'll win the argument. Because then people will realize the importance of what you're doing, paradoxically, right? Don't apologize. Don't apologize. You're right. So I just want to finish with a little situation from where I'm from. So as some of you know, I'm a farmer from Wales. Wales has a proud tradition of civil resistance, let me tell you. We had to put up with the English. I'm an immigrant from England, so I'm a bit like, you know, whatever. But I'm proud. And you should be proud as well, right? in Wales, the first people who went to fight the fascists in World War II, right, were working class miners from near where I live. They left their homes to fight the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. That was not an easy decision. They left their families in poverty. They knew they may not come back. But I want to assure you of their motivation. And I know a researcher that I used to work with who researched this. And the primary responsibility was summed up in the following sentence. They went to Spain because it had to be done. Okay? It had to be done. They didn't know whether they were going to win, but they knew it had to be done. And what I sense and what I'm inspired by all you guys, is the sense you're doing it because it has to be done. And I want to honor you all and say, fantastic, okay? Fantastic work. And you have my total support for what it's worth. Unfortunately, it's not worth that much because I'm not that important. But I am going to my death, as it were, congratulating you and thinking it's fantastic. And all I want to finish on is to say the best of luck, you know, the best of luck. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Roger. I'm a bit speechless. Actually, we invited you because we have the last 2 weeks been struggling a lot with facing a lot of opinions from all different kinds, from the right, from the left, from the environmental movements and so on. And we ourselves have also been struggling to keep the courage and be proud of what we're doing and facing up to the fact that we are convinced about our actions. But we needed really support, and so I'm really grateful that you took time for this meeting. I know you're extremely busy, Westminster next, and yeah, I know lots of things happening in A22 network, and we will continue to be a part of A22 network. And as we all heard, I guess everyone has to listen to this speech, your speech, once again or twice, 3 times 4, because we have to melt it down. And the fact is, people need to sit on the highway one time or several times, but this is needed. This is what we have to do. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much.